Kansas keeps the senior day streak alive, wearing those crisp, nice all-red uniforms. They beat Arizona 83-76 to end the season on a high note. We're going to talk about it all coming up next. This is the paid podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. By the way, Kevin, I guess I forgot to warn you about our new intro video.
I was totally taken back, and I'm not sure I'll be able to adjust in time for the show. So
yeah, I forgot to I guess make you aware of that before we started recording or before we went live. I was like, oh yeah, we've got these really cool new intro videos. Shout out to Tucker D. Franklin, by the way,
nice
of the KC Sports Network, who put that together for us. So pretty cool stuff on our YouTube channel from Tucker there. So I'm Nick Springer. I'm here with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible. Member FDIC. This is the paid podcast. If you have not already, you should be subscribed on our audio platforms, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen, and of course on our YouTube channel. If you're joining us live in the YouTube chat right now after the game here on Saturday afternoon, drop a comment, share your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. As always, it's always great to interact with the fine folks of the chat who join us live. And thanks so much for spending some time with us on a Saturday evening, Saturday afternoon, whatever you want to call it, after KU gets the win. So be sure to subscribe wherever you watch and or listen. Turn on those notification bells so you know when we drop episodes, when you know when we're going live. We're going to be talking some KU basketball today, but we've been very busy also already covering KU football to start the spring practices. So lots going on, certainly, right now in the world of KU. So thanks so much to everybody that's tuned in with us either live or after the fact. Really appreciate you and really appreciate your support in helping us continue to grow the show. So with that being said, Kevin, Kansas beats Arizona 83-76. A big W for the Jayhawks. They get it done on senior day, and feels like we got to start off with Hunter Dickinson, man. I mean, he has been playing at an absolutely insane level over the past basically 6 games now, and that certainly continued tonight against Arizona. He ends up with tying a career high, I believe, with 33 points to go along with 10 rebounds. Only turned it over once. I know we talked for the Houston game, he turned it over quite a bit. That was something that you had highlighted about that game. In this game, he doesn't turn it over. He's great. And even hits a 3 at one point in the game as well. Ends up with 33 points. Just an all-around very impressive performance from Hunter Dickinson.
Yeah, coming out of the Utah swing where you had the Utah game and the BYU game, I think a lot of people questioned the effort level of this team. And specifically, a lot of those fingers pointed back to Hunter Dickinson, right? Especially when Kansas was getting absolutely worked on the offensive glass. And it wasn't all Hunter Dickinson's fault. In some of those games, it felt like if Dickinson wasn't grabbing a defensive rebound, Kansas wasn't getting that defensive rebound. But I still think that there's a level that he hit coming off of that trip with all the criticism, all the different things, where Hunter's energy level has been significantly better. It's noticeable, and it's not just on offense, although on offense you're seeing a lot less of sort of what I'd call the Hunter spurt, right, where he'll score 6 points really quickly, you won't hear from him for a while, then he'll score 6 points really quickly again. No, he's been really aggressive all the way through, and Kansas needed every one of those points in this one. To your point, the 3 was a big one. He hit a jumper, I think, right before the end of a shot clock in another situation where DeJuan Harris basically said, there's 3 seconds in the shot clock. Like, I'm just going to throw this thing to Hunter and hopefully do something good with it. And Hunter made the shot. And it was a game. I'm sure we'll talk more about Hunter as we go in, but overall, Nick, I thought it was a game where you had positives for each of the seniors, where all of those guys really had their moments in the way that you would want it to go in a big senior night win like this.
100% agree. Obviously, it started with a bang with the alley-oop dunk to start the game to KJ Adams from DeJuan Harris. He also had that great play late that extended the lead for Kansas to make it a 7-point game where KJ Adams, it was a 77-72 game. KJ Adams punches the rebound out to DeJuan Harris. He kind of waits for KJ to reset and then lobs him a dunk that was one of the loudest crowd pops at Allen Fieldhouse maybe this season. So, incredible game for KJ Adams, certainly. And DeJuan Harris, we talked quite a bit about DeJuan Harris after the Houston game, Kevin, and how, you're not asking him to score a lot, but he has to be solid in other areas. Well, this was a game where he did that, right? He's only scores 9 points, but he has 9 assists to just 1 turnover, right?
Was really good defensively too.
Yeah.
Was a guy that Arizona, if you've seen Caleb Love play before, he's a guy that can shoot you into or out of a lot of games. And it felt like the guys who were doing the scoring for Arizona, for the most part, was the guard that DeJuan Harris was not on. And so I think sometimes, because it's really hard to track a guy defensively, his defensive stuff goes under the radar, right? Because he's not generating turnovers at the rate that he used to. His defense used to be really obvious because he would generate all kinds of turnovers, and so you'd have to look at it and say, well, DeJuan had 4 steals. Obviously, he had a great defensive game. But I think when you look at some of the games where he's defended really well, that's helped Kansas to win. You think about the Elite Eight game against Miami, where he was put on Cam McGusty, who was red hot at halftime, and he cooled Cam McGusty off, helped Kansas reach the Final Four. And then those first 10 to 12 minutes of the second half against North Carolina, in both of those cases, they weren't necessarily stat-heavy DeJuan Harris defensive games, but if you were watching, you could see how much of an impact he was having. I think in this one, there were a lot of good defensive DeJuan Harris moments. You're just hoping he also made some really nice decisions in key moments, made a big 3-pointer, hit Zeke Mayo for another big 3-pointer, and then late in the game gets the ball after KJ Adams taps it out. Looks like he wants to take the 3-pointer, pulls it out, makes a smart play, and then finds KJ on the backside for a lob. And so some big moments down the stretch for DeJuan Harris as well. And let's be honest, DeJuan's been a little bit of a mixed bag late in games over the course of his KU career. He's had some bad moments. A lot of people remember the stepping out of bounds against UNC. There have been other moments. Houston earlier this year also made the game winner against Iowa State, a year or two ago. So he's had some moments sort of on both sides of it. I thought he closed this one out really, really well with some of the decisions and plays that he made over the last 5 to 7 minutes.
Well, and look, they needed his defense because unfortunately it became very apparent very early that Diggy Coit was just not going to be somebody who was a viable player in this game. He was just not going to be able to provide enough defense really to make an impact. And that was reflected in the fact that Diggy Coit only ended up playing 9 minutes in the game for Kansas. And so when it became clear that he was not going to be somebody that Kansas could rely on off the bench, I think that put more pressure on DeJuan Harris and on Zeke Mayo to step up, and they both did, which was really nice to see. I think you mentioned the execution late in the game. Carl, with the comment here, talking about executing at the end of the game. What did you see from that, and what was maybe your takeaways from how KU was able to close this one out?
Yeah, I thought it was a multifaceted thing. I thought the hustle was good on the glass. You think about the other play DeJuan made was the offensive rebound, right, and stick back that he got. I thought KJ made a couple nice plays on the glass, Hunter as well, and they made free throws down the stretch. I know you had kind of pointed out right before we got it on air, Arizona kind of with a weird decision to foul Zeke Mayo with 55 seconds left. I understand if you're down and wanting to extend and say, hey, let's push these things out a bunch of possessions. KU hasn't necessarily been the best at the free throw line today. I'm not sure. I think you want to get the ball out of Zeke Mayo's hands. If you're going to do that, that's not necessarily who you want to foul to potentially give free points to. Rylan Griffin, though, stepped up as well and made those free throws. Rylan's been a little bit more, hit or miss from the line, but I really did think that defensively they played fairly well down the stretch. I know to Derek's point, I believe Jaden Bradley was terrific, over the last however long. Kansas really struggled to stay in front of him. There was one where Jaden Bradley just got a layup and basically wasn't contested at all, which was not great. But overall, I thought down the stretch, Kansas got better looks than Arizona did, and then finished things off at the free throw line in a way that Kansas didn't do against Houston. The other part of it, Nick, Kansas did a lot better against the press in the final minute than Kansas did against Houston. That was another kind of weird decision, though. Arizona didn't really pressure DeJuan Harris, so they mounted the ball to DeJuan kind of easily. Kansas got it up the court fairly easily. So it was kind of a weird, late game press, but Kansas also handled it, and so they did what they were supposed to do.
Yeah, I got to be honest. I did not understand what Arizona was doing at all for like the last 90 seconds of the game. It didn't make any sense. Like, it's a 5-point game with a minute left. You foul, and then it's a 7-point game. Then you make it a 5-point game again, and you don't foul, and then you throw it away. And it did not make any sense to me. I would love to maybe get a little bit more insight from Tommy Lloyd about what the hell they were thinking to end the game, because obviously we've talked about it. We've seen it this season. Kansas late in games has had issues. I mean, they were up 6 with a 1-and-1 with 14 seconds left against Houston and found a way to lose. So, like, if you're Arizona, why wouldn't you extend the game as long as possible and put more pressure on this KU team? But instead, they started to do that, then stopped, and then just gave up. But like you said, really, Kansas handled it much better than we've seen them really in any game, I think, this season late in the game like that. Certainly in conference play. With the way they handled it. So that was a really nice positive, certainly.
Yeah, to the point that Jacob makes there too, where he said he thought that they were going to choke it away. On Twitter, I was talking to Adam Sullivan, who, if you guys don't follow him, you definitely should. He's great
stats guy
with KU stats, and hey, this is the first time since this, or when KU out rebounds another team, here's how often KU wins. His stat was basically, if KU needs to be up going into the final 5 minutes, Hunter Dickinson's little hook shot that he dropped in came at 4:59. So they were tied heading into the final 5 minutes, and he was just kind of throwing his hands up in the air. But Kansas was in a spot, I think, where a lot of people were uncomfortable, where you said, hey, this is a situation Kansas has been in a lot, where Kansas has not come out on the better side of these things. And, credit to the Jayhawks. Today they made the plays that needed to be made, and Arizona didn't. It's been kind of the other way around in a lot of close games for the Jayhawks this year.
And one guy we have yet to touch on to this point is Zeke Mayo. And I do want to dive deeper into what his role was and hopefully how maybe that can springboard into the postseason for Kansas. But it's a good opportunity for us to take a quick break and allows us to remind you that you can shop Home Field Apparel at homefieldapparel.com. By the way, I don't know if you've seen, Kevin, Home Field Apparel just dropped some brand new Kansas gear recently. So you'll definitely want to be keeping an eye on that, including some women's basketball gear. So it's a basketball box. They've got the 1992 KU women's, I believe, Big Eight championship. I think Big Eight championship shirt. If
you guys don't follow women's basketball for whatever reason, Kansas has one of the nation's best recruiting classes coming in. They've got multiple 5 stars in there, and so women's basketball is going to be fun to watch this next year. They could be loaded up pretty well.
And you could support them at homefieldapparel.com with the shirt that I just referenced and find plenty of other great Kansas gear over there. And you can use the promo code PAYHEAT24 for 15% off your first order over at homefieldapparel.com. We are back in just a minute.
Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your #1 source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
Success in real estate takes more than vision. It takes the right financial partner. When someone takes something rundown and turns it into something great, that's called a comeback story. Like Bryan Group. They take distressed properties here in KC, completely rework them, and then turn them into valuable real estate. But that kind of work needs the right bank behind it. Enter Emprise Bank. They're not about cookie-cutter loans. They saw Bryan Group's vision, backed them, and now they're making big moves in Kansas City real estate. Talk about your partner in possible. Emprise doesn't do one-size-fits-all financing. They invest in potential and back growth. Visit emprisebank.com/KC to learn more. Emprise Bank, member FDIC, equal housing lender.
This is the paid podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. Thank you, Derek. Thank you. I thought that was pretty good too. Did a pretty good job there.
This is a smooth transition.
Shouting out our sponsors. We are brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in possible, member FDIC. I'm Nick Springer with Kevin Flaherty. And right before the break, right before the great plug by me, hate to brag, but right before that, we were about to touch on one guy that has struggled down the stretch for Kansas, and especially on the road. And even in his last home game wasn't great, and that's Zeke Mayo. And boy, he stepped up in a big way today for Kansas. Ends up with 18 points, ends up with 20 points, actually. Yeah. 7 from 3. Also had 6 assists and 4 rebounds as well. He really stepped up in a big way today for KU. And this kind of goes back to a point that I think we were kind of dancing around after the Houston game, which is, with as great as Hunter Dickinson is and with as great as he's been playing at a first-team All-American level, I think, over the past couple of weeks, it's just in 2025, if your 5-man is your only primary scorer, the game is different. It's just going to be really hard to win games. And so you look at this roster and there is a perfectly sized hole for perimeter outside scoring. And it's Zeke Mayo is really the guy that you need to fill that role. And he has struggled to do that, but certainly today he did not, and ended up playing very, very well. And Lasol steps in and says, hey, Zeke Mayo has played well at home, but his last home game, if you recall, actually, he did not play well. So he wasn't playing well at all, either at home or on the road. So it was nice to see him bounce back. And obviously, with the Big 12 tournament in Kansas City, it's close to Lawrence, so maybe that will extend for him a little bit into Kansas City. But certainly, it was great to see him step up. And kind of like I mentioned earlier, Kansas really needed it because it became pretty clear that Ziggy Coit was not going to be a viable option. And so in terms of legit perimeter scoring, that kind of really left it up to Zeke to be the guy to step up. Obviously, Rylan Griffin was able to hit a couple shots as well, but Zeke was the guy. And he stepped up in a big way tonight.
Yeah, and to Carl's point about the guards getting downhill that he posted in the chat, I thought that was something else that Zeke did well. Like, obviously, he shot well from the outside, but you also saw both he and Rylan sort of attack it and get to the rim at multiple points in this game. And I think that's so huge for this team. They have to work inside out. They aren't a team that's going to come out and make 15 threes and just bury you from the outside. I'm not saying they can't shoot, but that ball needs to touch the paint first, where guys are getting in rhythm shots off of the ball, coming back out. That's where the strength of this team lies. And so seeing guys be aggressive and get to the rim, I think was really encouraging. I was encouraged by that part from Zeke. It was nice to see him kind of put the turnover bug away too, because he'd had a couple games there where not only did he not shoot well, he was turning the ball over like crazy. I think he had like 13 turnovers or 12 turnovers, something like that, in his last 11 maybe. It was somewhere around there. Double-digit turnovers over his last 2 games was a lot better in that respect. And so I think that if this Kansas team is going to do anything in this postseason, it can't just be Hunter Dickinson. It has to be Zeke Mayo there. And to your point, when Kansas has been at its best sometimes this year, it's been more Zeke than Hunter. And so I think he at least, needs to be the Robin to Hunter's Batman. And there are going to be some times when maybe Kansas even needs Zeke to be Batman. It was great to see him bounce back and play this well on senior night.
Yeah, Derek mentioned there was a lot of heavy hitters in the crowd tonight for Kansas. You had Devin Neal, who, of course, is really close friends with Zeke Mayo. Christian Brown, of course, is really close friends with DeJuan Harris. Nick Collison as well. Some pretty heavy hitters at the game, and Kansas showed up for him. Got the big win, 83-76. So,
by the way, Brock, somebody had asked, who are these people for the picture of Christian Brown and Devin Neal, and it said that Christian Brown was Nick Collison, and I forget who it said Devin Neal was.
I saw your tweet.
Yeah, it was pretty.
It was pretty bad.
AI can maybe do some things fairly well. It apparently cannot identify Kansas Jayhawks because it definitely mistook one former white Kansas basketball player for another one, and did not get either player right in the picture. So.
Yeah, maybe pump the brakes on the AI stuff a little bit. But yeah, listen, I echo all of your points on Zeke Mayo. I think as we've gotten down the stretch this season, I think that's really become one of the most glaring issues with this team is you can have Hunter Dickinson play at as high a level as he can play at, which we've seen. It's just that you need some sort of complement from the perimeter, and it's not going to be DeJuan Harris just because that's just not how he plays. We've seen Diggy Coit step up off the bench, but maybe it's just not enough volume-wise. Like it's obvious who it needs to be. It's obvious who needs to be that guy from the outside. It's Zeke Mayo, and so it was fantastic to see him have a great game today. And again, hopefully he can carry that into the Big 12 tournament and beyond, because I think that's the biggest key. And the other thing I wanted to say about the postseason as well is I was really impressed with how KU responded in this game, Kevin, because there were two times this happened. And this has been an issue for Kansas kind of ongoing, where they've had these pretty significant scoring droughts. In the first half, they had 4 minutes where they didn't score. That let Arizona get back into it. And in the second half, they had a similar scoring drought that maybe wasn't as extreme, but Arizona ended up tying the game, I think, around the 10-minute mark when Bill Self called a timeout. And it was at that moment that I thought, okay, from this point forward, what's going to happen is going to really tell us about where this team is at heading into the postseason. And they were able to respond. And that gives me a lot more confidence, I think, going into the postseason. And that's why this game was obviously so important, I think, for Kansas to show that and to get a win on senior night, to, give their 43rd straight win or 42nd straight win, whatever it is, on senior night. All that is to say, like, hey, you face some adversity in this game against Arizona, who is a good team, who is going to end up being probably a top 4 seed. You face some adversity. Arizona fought back. You had a tie game. You were able to overcome that and find a way to execute down the stretch like we talked about earlier and close the game out. All of that is encompassing is to say that just gives me a lot more confidence that Kansas is going to have something to say about this postseason. I'm not saying, they're going to make a deep run or anything like that, but it gives me confidence that this team's going to perform at a level that's going to put them in position to be successful, I think, a little bit in the postseason.
Yeah, this wasn't a perfect game. Like it would be so easy to look here and say, oh, KU, beat a ranked team because they just played out of their minds, and you worry if they can play at that level again. What Kansas did today is replicable. It really is. And you actually look at the fact that Kansas got 2 points from its bench, and some of the other things in this one, you would actually hope that Kansas could exceed what it did today in some certain situations. But I do think that this was a game going in, Nick, that almost if Kansas had lost Arizona, I'll put it that way, I think maybe I would have been a little bit more down. But generally speaking, Kansas winning on senior night with 4 seniors in the starting lineup with all the things, we've seen that this Kansas team has an A game, right? Like they beat Duke. They absolutely curb stomped UCF in something that I don't think enough people give Kansas credit for what it did because other people weren't doing that at UCF. I mean, that was a great performance that I think a lot of people wrote off because it was UCF. And so there have been times when this team has had a great A game. The issue, as we've said so many times on the show, and we've just drilled it in over and over and over again, the issue is that the consistency hasn't been there game in and game out. And I think that even if Kansas won this game and the Jayhawks did, I was still going to come out of it with let's see it. The one thing I will say, Kansas didn't play badly against Texas Tech. It lost to Texas Tech, but the Jayhawks didn't play badly. Kansas didn't play badly against Houston. Actually, Jayhawks acquitted themselves fairly well in a place where pretty much nobody wins. And so you have, 5 games now where I'm not saying KU's played well, but I'm not sure KU's played badly over that 5-game period. And so I'm probably more impressed by that part than I am of KU rising up on any one given day and having a strong performance on that one given day.
Yeah, I mean, that consistency is going to be the name of the game going forward for Kansas, right? Like, if you're able to play a B to B plus game consistently, if you're KU, that's probably going to be good enough, I think, to maybe get you to the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. Even if you are a 7 seed and you have to face a 2 seed or a 3 seed, or if you're a 6 seed, whatever it may be in the second round. Like, I feel pretty good about that. It's just, can they do that? Derek also made a comment about AJ Storr and AJ Storr,
yeah.
man. I do not understand why he's even playing a single minute at this point in the season. I don't get it. He brings nothing. He's horrible on defense. He's is just I don't get it. I don't. There's no explanation for it. Like, take those minutes and literally give them to Marquise Passmore. I would rather watch Marquise Passmore out there with those minutes. It's just
other than that, how'd you like to play, Mrs. Lincoln?
Yeah, horrible. I mean, just an absolute. I don't understand why he even is even allowed near the court at this point for KU. And I feel bad saying that. You know, I'm sure he's a great kid, but like, it just hasn't worked, hasn't clicked the whole season. And now you're in a position where why even bother playing him at this point? I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me. I understand. I think this is just me totally speculating. You know, on Rock Chalk Sports Talk, we used to have this thing called reckless speculation. This is reckless speculation from me. Reckless speculation. Absolutely no basis for what I'm about to say. The only thing I can come up with is that in the NIL era, Phil Self is trying to save face with possible future transfers by still letting AJ Storr play a little bit and saying, oh, well, you know, even though he struggled through the year, like, I still gave him chances, still gave him whatever, blah, 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 and still played him. So that way guys that are looking to transfer, like, well, if I transfer into Kansas and I suck, I'm just going to ride the bench the whole year. I don't know. That is my reckless speculation for today, is that it must be NIL related. I have no idea, though. That is just totally me speculating about it. But I don't, but that all is to say, I don't understand it at all. And I don't know why he still plays, because he was like -10 in 8 minutes, whatever.
Yeah,
it was,
at one point I know he was -8 in like 6 minutes, and it was like, oh man, that's
let's see. It was not good. I'm trying to find his plus minus right now. AJ Storr, -8 in 8 minutes. -8.
Nice.
So,
-1 each minute.
Yeah,
that's consistency.
Yeah, that is consistently terrible. So we can be done with that, I think, hopefully. But
one thing I did want to bring up, though, Nick, I know Brad Zollers commented earlier, and Brad was at the game, and I one of the things that he had told me, I was worried. I don't know how you felt coming into this one, Nick, about the reaction that Kansas fans were going to give this senior class, and especially with the way that this game had went with the way this year, had gone, and with the way that I know a lot of people get frustrated with DeJuan Harris and KJ Adams, and and all of those different things. I thought it was amazing that it sounded like from Brad that the fan reaction was extremely positive for all of those guys, and I think it should have been.
Absolutely.
I think, when you look back on guys at the end of their careers, there are a lot of guys that have come through Kansas that, were flawed basketball players that didn't hit the big shot in the big moment, made a big mistake at a key time. It's great on senior night to remember the other things, right? To remember DeJuan Harris beating Iowa State with, the layup that he did to beat Iowa State, the defense that he played in that playoff run. I'll always remember KJ Adams absolutely destroying that Missouri player's layup a year ago in that game at Allen Fieldhouse, and all the things with KJ and his mom, obviously, tugs on the heartstrings as well. Hunter Dickinson, his last game at Allen Fieldhouse, sets his KU career scoring record, ties his career scoring record that he had at Michigan. Zeke has had some great moments this year, some big shots that he's hit. And so for the fans to be so positive with those guys and not come into it with I'm going to boo this guy because I'm mad about the way the season went. We've talked about when maybe the fan reaction hasn't been the best at times. I just feel like we have to shout out the fans for being great in that circumstance as well.
Absolutely. 1000% agree. I mean, and you talk about KJ Adams and DeJuan Harris. Those guys are national champions. I mean, they absolutely deserve it. And I thought Bill Self actually kind of said it best on Thursday ahead of the game, sort of previewing this game, in which he said, guys like DeJuan Harris and KJ Adams, those guys are the exception now. Those guys are the exception to the norm, right? Like, you're not going to see very many players at any school across the country, obviously not just Kansas, anywhere where, hey, for 3 or 4 years consecutively, those guys were major contributors on teams that had a lot of success, even going back to the national championship and so on and so forth. So, those guys are the exception to the rule. And if you remember, there was a very small period of time as sort of this NIL era started where I think some fans were saying, hey, I want to have that connection to players. I want to watch players grow up over the course of their career at college, right? Like, that's part of the appeal, I think, of college athletics to a certain extent. And then how quickly it's changed with NIL to, hey, we need to go buy the best roster every year, right? Like, if it doesn't work, clean the house and buy the best roster. But the point being, guys like KJ Adams and DeJuan Harris are going to be few and far between, I think, going forward, at least in the short term, right? I mean, unless if at some point maybe there's more curbs, more guardrails put on NIL to where it's less crazy. But in the short term, I'm talking in the next 5-10 years, like, those guys are going to be the exception. And you kind of touched on it. I mean, with KJ Adams obviously dealing with some personal stuff, and he even said himself, like, I kind of made KU my identity, right? Like, I became ingrained with KU. And then DeJuan Harris, I mean, Bill Self talked about what he's endured as well to get to where he's at. So yeah, absolutely love that. And love that the fan reaction was so positive to those guys, because I think, again, in the next couple of years or so, you're going to be missing having this experience. You're going to be missing watching a player as a freshman, then a sophomore, junior, senior. Like, I think you're going to be missing that. And you're not going to have those very many guys that are like that are real significant players on your teams, and you can sort of watch them grow with their game over the course of their careers. So yeah, absolutely agree with you on that, Kevin, and that it's great to see. Really glad the fans gave their support. And look, to be honest with you, I had no doubt that KU fans would show their support. Like, I had no doubt that people would cheer. I had no doubt that people would support them. Obviously, yes, this season and even going back to last season as well, things haven't gone to the expectations of Kansas basketball and to what KU basketball expects. But I had no doubt that KU fans would show their support and would truly represent the Kansas fan base how it is, where once a Jayhawk, always a Jayhawk, man. It's family.
Yeah, for sure. So it was an awesome thing to see. Like I said, it wasn't like I thought that the stadium would have, that you'd have, half boos or anything like that. But I did worry that you would have a few loud, people basically doing the whole trolling thing or whatever. And so it was nice to hear that it wasn't like that at all. And was really great, again, to see a senior night where all of the seniors kind of had their moments, where they each had plays that were huge that we brought up, earlier. But, we've talked a lot about this game, Nick. I think as big a win as this was, and it was a ranked win, it meant that Kansas, still has a winning record in the Big 12. If KU lost, they would have been 500 in the Big 12. So KU has never failed to have a winning record in Big 12 play since the inception of the contest. You win your 351st senior night in a row. And
that's an exact stat, by the way. That is an exact stat.
The streaks that come along with that. But the thing that I wanted to ask you, Nick, is, okay, game's over. Postseason is here now. I know. I think Kansas can get the 6th seed if Houston beats Baylor tonight, I believe, off the top of my head. But where do you see this Kansas team now that the regular season is done?
Yeah, obviously this regular season overall has been a disappointment. Is probably too strong of a word. I mean, I guess maybe not. You were preseason number 1, so maybe not. Maybe disappointment is the right way to frame it, but it's been up and down, to say the least. I mean, there's been some nice wins, some really big wins for Kansas. Yeah, Derek mentioned it. I'm with you, Derek. I'm with you. I don't mean to age myself, but the last time KU lost on senior night was like 15 years before I was born.
George Washington blocked KU shot out of bounds, as the buzzer sounded or something. It's been that long.
But yeah, this season I think has definitely been one of disappointment and frustration. But on the flip side, you're gonna be in the NCAA tournament. I mean, right? Like that's like your one of your worst year in 23 years is you're looking at being a 7 seed in the NCAA tournament, and maybe 8 or possibly even a 6 seed in the NCAA tournament. Like that's your worst year. Look, North Carolina's missed the NCAA tournament. Kentucky's missed the NCAA tournament multiple times. We don't even need to mention UCLA, Indiana. Like the only other school that's even close to that discussion is Duke, right? Like,
well, wasn't there a year in there where Duke said they wouldn't be participating in the NCAA tournament, even though they had no chance to reach the NCAA?
Well, North Carolina, I remember North Carolina got invited to the NIT, and they said they wouldn't do it one year. I do remember that. But yeah, the point being there's blue bloods, and then there's the next the blue bloods, right? Like the next tier, and Kansas is in that tier firmly. Now, obviously, they need to continue to perform to maintain that tier, but and Carl brings up the point is Kansas won in 1988 as a 6 seed, right? And with Danny Manning, so yeah, and Derek is right. It's a new season, new possibilities. You mentioned it with the Big 12 tournament, yes. So Kansas is sitting at 11-9. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, and I think you're right. I believe if Baylor loses to Houston tonight, that could put Kansas up to the 6th seed in the Big 12 tournament. So if you're the 6th seed, you're looking at playing at the late game on Wednesday night. So that would be like 8:30, 9 o'clock. So that would kind of suck. The late game on Wednesday night. If you win that, you would advance to play the 3 seed, which would be, I think, Arizona actually again. Funnily enough, you would play Arizona again on Thursday. And then if you move on from there on to Friday, you're probably looking at playing Texas Tech, I would think, at that point. So, I mean, all things considered, to me, if you're talking Big 12 tournament specifically, any path that doesn't have you playing Houston until the championship game is an easy path, I guess, is basically the best way to put it. So we'll see what happens there with Kansas. The one thing that I did want to mention is with this team, we've talked about it. Hunter obviously has been performing at a very high level. It just gives me a little bit of pause. I wonder if Hunter is going to run out of steam at any point. If Kansas does make that run, would that happen? So that could be something, I guess, to possibly consider. And then beyond that, you look at the NCAA tournament again. Kansas probably. I mean, let's say even if you win just one game in the Big 12 tournament on Wednesday and lose on Thursday, I think that probably gets you at worst an 8 seed, probably a 7 seed. I would think
7 probably, but
yeah. Obviously, you'd want to avoid being an 8 because that would give you a 1 seed in the second round more than likely. So hopefully a 7, I guess, in that scenario, and kind of go from there, I guess.
Yeah. I think that matchups are going to be what everybody is going to be watching on Selection Sunday, because there are absolutely some teams that are going to be seated higher than Kansas that I would not mind at all if Kansas winds up playing those teams in the tournament. And then you have teams like Purdue that, will probably have a fairly high seed, and they run ball screens every freaking time down the court. And that's probably not a team that Kansas really wants to see, where Hunter Dickinson is going to be defending ball screens for 35 minutes. And so a lot is going to depend on matchups. Look, the 22 team, I don't know if they were a top 5 Bill Self team overall, when you look at some of the other teams he's had. But they kind of peaked at the right time, which was good. And obviously the matchups and the tournament kind of fell to them a little bit. And so all of that worked out. And I'm not saying, hey, if you get the right matchups, this team is going to win it all. But I do think that this is a team that there are going to be some teams that are seeded number 2 or number 3, where if they do get Kansas, they're going to kind of say, well, we're hoping we don't get Kansas on the wrong night type of deal, because Kansas is capable of beating those kinds of teams in a one-off. They've proven it all year. The question is, can they stack wins together to make it to a Final Four?
Well, look, you look at Joe Lunardi's bracketology right now. These are his 2 seeds: Michigan State, Texas Tech, Tennessee, and Alabama. Michigan State, Kansas beat earlier in the year.
Yep.
Texas Tech, I think you probably would take that. You would take your chances there, I think, in that situation, because you played them pretty close just recently. Alabama would be bad. I would not want that. I would not want Alabama.
No,
and then Tennessee, we all know Rick Barnes chokes in March. So,
in fairness, I don't know if it's Rick Barnes chokes in March as much as Barnes's teams are so physical that I think that it's almost like Marty Schottenheimer with the Chiefs, where it's like they get worn down by the end of the year. And so they're playing a second round game and they're just basically, they've got no legs for their jump shots. They shoot 3 for 28 from 3 and wind up going home. And so I don't know if it's as much a coaching thing as like Barnes's teams they're going to have a game where they shoot basically where they'd be better off punting the ball at the rim, and that usually sends them home.
You look at the 3 seeds that he has here. You're looking at oh gosh, I just lost it. You're looking at St. John's, Wisconsin, Texas A&M, and Iowa State. Already beat Iowa State. I think you'd probably take a matchup against Texas A&M. St. John's would be an intriguing one for sure.
Yeah, get to face Zuby against
the Zuby revenge game. Yeah, the Zuby revenge game. Yeah, so that's what Lenardi has. I know, Kevin, I think you have some feelings about Lenardi that maybe you don't always love him, but I just figured that was the first one I would go to.
Oh, no, I get it. It's the easiest action there. And Carl, friend of the show, Carl knows that I'm not a Lunardi fan. If you look at like Bracket Matrix, where it ranks like the top bracketologists.
Yeah, he's like one of the worst ones, right?
He's like 120th or something like that. And, some of them, some of the names of like the brackets like in front of him it's like Sarah's very first bracket or, whatever else in terms of like people predicting bracket. It's not quite that bad, but it very much is, that, he's not very high on those charts. And so it's not that he's awful or whatever, but there are definitely a lot more accurate bracketologists out there. But Lunardi has camped out in that perch at ESPN for quite a while now. And like you said, his brackets are the easiest to find at this point for sure.
He maybe has the best job, right? I mean,
absolutely. I mean
he can be wrong every time and it doesn't even matter at this point. He's just
it's basketball weatherman, right?
Yeah, he's locked in. I mean, it don't matter what he projects. And by the way, I don't mean to project over the first round game that Kansas is going to play, right? Like I know we were just talking about, 2 and 3 seeds that Kansas would be facing in that scenario in the round of 32. Like I don't want to overlook the possibility of what Kansas is going to face in the first round, because more than likely you're going to be getting either a mid-major team that is really good, that won their conference tournament, that's got a high seed, or you're going to be getting, a team that could be from a Power 5 conference that didn't have as good of a season like Kansas did, and those are dangerous teams too.
Yeah, for sure. And I've talked before, I like Kansas's chances to win their first round game, and the main reason why is history. When you look at Bill Self at Kansas, since 2014, they've only lost 1 game in an odd round. And you would say, well, that's weird to phrase it that way. But those are the games that you get a week to prepare for, right? Like the games where Kansas usually struggles is where you're playing your second game in 3 days. And I think that Kansas sometimes has a tendency to get tight in second round and Elite 8 games. By the way, the one odd rounded game that they've lost over that time period, Nick, was the 2018 Final Four, where Villanova just shot the lights out. So it's not like there was a whole lot that you could do to change that outcome from a game plan perspective, whatever else. Anthony has the question: if Kansas wins the Big 12 tournament, what seed will they be then? Probably a 6, I would say. I don't know if they can quite get up to 5. I like the question though, because I feel like people always talk about worst case scenarios, and there is, Big 12 tournament where you've got teams clobbering each other for 4 rounds. Like there are a lot of different things that can happen. Carl asked earlier about Houston losing their legs again. Houston is immune to that stuff for whatever reason. I don't know what the deal is. I don't know if Kelvin Sampson's giving those guys horse tranquilizers or what it is, but the way that Houston plays is built to win one-off games. And what I mean by that is Houston can shoot badly and still beat you because they're going to turn you over. So they're going to get more possessions than you because they're going to turn you over more than you turn them over. And they're going to beat you on the offensive glass. So they're going to get more possessions and more shots because they do that. And so you're going to play a game against Houston, and Houston, their legs may go, they may shoot 3 for 25 from 3, but the issue is they're going to take 15 more shots than you, and it's just really tough to win in that situation. I think Houston would have gone to the Final Four last year if Jamal Shead had not gotten hurt. And so I really think that Houston, for whatever reason, a lot of physical teams, you do see them wear down, especially over a multiple games and in multiple days type of situation. For whatever reason, Houston is one of those teams where the motor just does not dip.
Well, and you just so eloquently outlined how Houston beat Kansas last week. They shot horribly. They didn't shoot the ball very well, but they shot about 26 more shots than KU did, and they forced 20 turnovers, and that's why they won. So
that's the way Houston wins, and it's the way that North Carolina won the 2017 national title. They didn't turn the ball over a whole bunch, and they killed you on the offensive glass. And so they beat Oregon in the Final Four, the team that beat KU right here in Kansas City. I think they won by 1. This is off the top of my head. They took like 10 more shots, and then I think they got like 15 more shots or something like that than Gonzaga in the national title game, again in a close game. And when you're just getting that many, fewer shots than your opponent, it's tough to win.
Yeah, back to Anthony's question about the Big 12 tournament. Yeah, I think absolute best case, maybe you get a 5, but probably a 6 seed. You're talking about winning 4 games in 4 days. More than likely, 2 of them would be against Texas Tech and Houston. So that's obviously 2 top 15 wins, a top 5 win in the case of Houston. So I don't know. I guess it would kind of depend on how things would shake out, but I would say absolute best case would be 5 seed. Probably even still, you probably might still be looking at a 6 seed because I think at this point, if you win just 1 game in Kansas City, you're looking at a 7, maybe an 8. If you win 2 or 3, then you're probably looking more at the 7 range, 6 range. If you win the whole thing, again, I guess 5 is probably the best case. And Derek earlier asked about the NCAA tournament and talked about what defines success tourney-wise. I think if you get to the Sweet 16, it's probably a success at that point, considering how the season has gone. And you haven't made the second weekend in what, 3 or 4 years now. So that would probably be, I guess, 3 years since the national championship. You haven't made the second weekend.
Yeah.
So that would be certainly a success if you do make the second weekend, and just kind of go from there. I don't know. I think if we're sitting here first weekend of April after the national championship game, and we're sitting here asking, was Kansas' season successful? I don't really know that anything besides like a Final Four / national championship run would make you say yes to that question. Like if you make the Sweet 16 and you lose, I don't think you can say the season was a success. So I don't know. Take that as you will. Like it'll be fun, obviously, if they make a run to the second weekend. But I think if we're talking macro, big picture stuff here, considering how the regular season has gone, making the Sweet 16, I don't think is enough to say that the season as a whole was a success. But I think you have to call it a tournament success based on where KU is going to be seated, I would think.
Yeah, that's exactly what I would say. Based on what the expectations were heading into the season, a Final Four, that's the success. Based on where we sit today and the way the season has gone, it's Sweet 16. And so, if you're looking at it now and saying, hey, and I'd like to ask you, Nick, again, Kansas has had success in odd numbered rounds. Kansas wins that round of 32 game. They head to the Sweet 16. They get a week to game plan. They find a way to win that. Kansas goes out in the Elite 8. That's kind of between the two. How are you feeling if Kansas gets knocked out in the Elite 8?
I would feel good, to be honest. I would feel good if they made
It's
it.
like I'd be smoking a cigar over here.
I would feel good if they made it that far, because you would have won, 2 games against, really 3 games against high quality opponents in the NCAA tournament and had a good run. I think I would be happy is not. I think people would take the term happy the wrong way. So I would say like satisfied, I guess.
Content.
Yeah, content, like with an Elite Eight run at this point. Again, I think you said it really well. There's kind of 2 different sets of expectations. I think based off the start of the season, Elite Eight would probably still not feel good enough, considering you were preseason number 1 and all this hype going into the season. But where you are now, an Elite Eight would feel probably pretty good. So that's kind of, I guess, where you would fall on that one.
Also, the Sweet 16, you get that monkey off your back, right? In terms of the Kansas has never reached the second weekend when it's been preseason number 1. So you could at least take that thing and throw it in the trash.
Yeah, there are some absolutely wild stats on that, considering teams that are preseason number 1 are typically like guaranteed to make at least the second weekend and beyond. And then there's Kansas, who has been, the times they've been preseason number 1, it's been like the complete opposite. So it's kind of funny how that has worked out. Thank you, Jerry, for the kind comment, by the way. Appreciate you. Thank you, Jerry. But yeah. So, well, listen, we've been going here for almost over 50 minutes. Really good conversation. Thanks so much, everybody in the chat. Kevin, you got anything else you want to add here before we wrap this one up?
No, I wanted to tell everybody here, I think it's our plan. I don't want to put you on the spot or anything, but I think it's our plan to go live after each Big 12 tournament game. Yes. And so we're planning on doing that. Wanted to say how much we appreciate you guys too, swinging by all season long, and not just basketball season. We started doing this live show thing during football season after each game, and we weren't entirely sure how it was going to go. Some of you guys, it feels like have been there, since day one on that, and we just want to say how much we appreciate it. And as long as you guys keep showing up and enjoying it, we're gonna continue to make this a big part of our show, I feel like.
Yep. Spread the word. Tell your friends about us, family, enemies, anybody, really. Anybody who will listen. That'd be great.
Subscribe your grandparents for the show. They probably have YouTube accounts too.
That's true. Yes. Take your grandparents' email, create a YouTube account, and subscribe as well. You can do that. You can do anything. It has been a pleasure. It's been so great to hear from people in the live chat. So great to have people interact with us on social media as well. Which, by the way, you can follow us at KCSN on Twitter. We post a lot of stuff there, especially from spring football. With spring football getting underway, lots of good content there as well. And yeah, spring football is going to continue. You mentioned it as well, Kevin. That is the plan, barring any sort of scheduling conflicts or anything like that. We're going to be doing some shows after every Big 12 tournament game as well. So hopefully that almost makes me not want to get the 6th seed, because then we're talking, it'll be like 9:00 on Wednesday night with the game tip off. We'll be here at almost midnight on Wednesday night. So we'll see. We'll see how it works out. But that is the current plan, is to continue to do some live reactions after each game through the course of the Big 12 tournament. The NCAA tournament may get kind of funky. I've got some scheduling stuff that we'll have to talk about, Kevin, off air about how that's going to work. But we'll go from there as well. And obviously, like I said, we got great content, not just for basketball, but also for spring football as well. I think we're going to be doing some more breakdowns of position by position, things like that for spring football as the spring continues. So be on the lookout for that as well. And of course, if you haven't already, please subscribe on our audio platforms, Apple, Spotify, or on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN as well. But that's going to wrap it up for today's show. Thanks so much again to everybody that joined us live. And after the fact, you can share a comment as well to join in the conversation. But until next time, he's Kevin Flaherty. I'm Nick Springer. We'll talk to you again soon. See ya.